Good evening, black people and all allies fighting for black liberation, black prosperity, and black joy. I'm Charles Blow, and welcome to Prime. First of all, happy Valentine's Day. I don't care if you have a boo or not. Happy Valentine's Day. That's why I wore this tie, so that you can so I can wish you happy Valentine's Day. Now to the big important news. President Biden spent the weekend in Camp David narrowing down his list of prospects to serve as the nation's first black Supreme Court justice who is a woman. On Thursday, he said he'd done a deep dive on at least 4 of those candidates to replace retiring Justice Stephen Breyer. But time is of the essence. Biden has until the end of February to meet his self-imposed deadline for announcing a nominee, which the White House says he's on track to do. Easing some worries among Democrats, Senator Ben Ray Lohan tweeted yesterday he's on the road to recovery after suffering a stroke last month. He'll be back in the Senate just in time to vote for a nominee.
Then I'll be back on the floor of the United States Senate in just a few short weeks to vote on important legislation and to consider a Supreme Court nominee. Now, rest assured, New Mexicans can know they will have a voice and a vote during this process. That has never changed.
But fresh criticism has been leveled against one of the leading contenders on the Supreme Court shortlist, that is D.C. Circuit Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. In her letter obtained by NBC News late last week, the first black judge, federal judge in Alabama, urged the president not to select Judge Jackson for the High Court. There are, quote, several exceptional, well-qualified black female aspirants, retired Judge U.W. Clemens wrote. But Judge Jackson is not one of them, he argued. Clemens zeroed in on a 2016 class action lawsuit that Jackson presided over, in which 5,500 black employees of Lockheed Martin alleged racial discrimination. As a federal trial judge at the time, Jackson refused to approve $22 million in settlement money that would go towards the plaintiffs at the company. Quote, Jackson gave the axe to a settlement designed to benefit black workers at one of the nation's largest employers, denied the injunctive relief agreed to by Lockheed Martin that would have addressed a root cause of systemic racial bias that could have been a model for a nation hungry for racial equity solutions, Clemens wrote. However, Clemens, who retired from federal court in 2009, served as counsel for the law firm on the losing side of the case. The White House has responded to Clemens' criticism. The deputy press secretary told NBC it's because of Judge Jackson's experience in roles on all levels of the justice system, her character, and her legal brilliance that President Biden nominated her to the D.C. Circuit Court, after which she earned her 3rd Senate confirmation, and he's very proud of that decision. Progressives have applauded Jackson for her record on labor rights as well as her work as a public defender. If nominated and confirmed, Jackson could shatter 2 glass ceilings, the nation's first black woman on the highest court, as well as the first federal public defender. Joining me now to discuss, Imani Gandy, senior editor of Law and Policy for Rewire News Group, and Dr. Rashawn Ray, professor of sociology at the University of Maryland. So, Imani, Judge U.W. Clemens has been described as one of MLK's foot soldiers. He worked as a civil rights attorney and helped desegregate the Birmingham Public Library and the University of Alabama football team. He was also one of the first 2 African Americans elected to the Alabama Senate since Reconstruction. What do you make of his criticisms? How much weight do you give them? And if now that they're out there, how damaging could they be?
I think that's a great question. I am not particularly familiar with the details of the class action lawsuit that Clemens has a problem with. I know that Ketanji Brown Jackson has said that she didn't find that there were any common questions among the plaintiffs. And when you're talking about class action lawsuits, that's one of the major sort of civil procedure hurdles that you have to get past. A class of plaintiffs all have to have a common question. So I'm not, I'd have to read the briefs. It's a very sort of technical civil procedure issue. And if we're talking about a lawyer who was on the losing side of that order or that motion, it's kind of hard to not look at that criticism with a grain of salt. By the same token, as you said, this is a man who is well known in the civil rights community, who is sort of, yeah, as you said, one of MLK's foot soldiers. So it's also difficult to discount that out of hand. But when it comes to sort of the record on labor, I think her record is a lot stronger than, for example, J. Michelle Childs' record. So I think it'll be interesting during the as the days go by to see what information comes out, what the administration is looking at, how progressives are responding, how Republicans are responding, because I do think it's a bit concerning that Republicans, Lindsey Graham, are so excited about Michelle Childs. I think that means that there's something there that we need to take a look at. And I think that that's a troubling circumstance.
Dr. Ray, with any of these women, they have long judicial or law careers, some of them judicial careers. People are going to be able to find something that they disagree with. They found it with Childs. They've now found it with Judge Jackson. In the context of an entire career, is it fair to do this? Is this the right way that we vet these particular candidates to say, on a particular case, you behaved in a particular way? Or for the Supreme Court, is it more about judicial philosophy?
Well, look, I mean, I definitely think it's about philosophy, but when they have a long record, it's also about a pattern of practice. So one of the things that's missing from this discussion, which I appreciate about the conversation we're having right now, of course, Biden has said that he's going to nominate a Black woman. That's great. But accordingly, when we not only need to look at where they went to school. I'm all for state schools. Pretty much all of my degrees have come from state schools, but we also need to look at their record, because we know that all skin folk are not kinfolk when it comes to being on the side of racial justice, when it comes to being in a position that people are going to pursue racial equality and also pursue equal rights for everyone, which of course the current Supreme Court is slanted. And then we know if we juxtapose, say, Clarence Thomas to Thurgood Marshall, we can clearly see the differences there. So it's important for people to not just look at what these people look like or where their degrees come from, but to also look at their records. So I think that it's okay. But of course, as you noted, there's always going to be people who disagree with a person's record when they've done something for this long. We need to look at a pattern and actually see the way they have presided over cases at different levels based on the sort of issues that we think are important.
And do you see any problematic pattern in the way that Judge Jackson has presided over issues?
Well, I think, no, not necessarily. But I do think that we should look into this particular case. And I think part of the reason why we should look into it is because of the source, the person who is talking about that, of what happened in that particular state. At the same time, look, I think all of the three women who are kind of the finalists, or the four, if we want to go to four, are all highly qualified. And we know, as you noted, the attacks that are coming at them has to do with their identities, has to do with race and gender, has to do with what we call intersectionality, where they're being attacked for their double disadvantage, the ways that marginalization operates in society. And that is something that we should defend to ensure that they all get equal opportunities. But we should also be paying attention to the fact that some of them have already went through Senate confirmations multiple times. We know that they've also went through confirmations in their states. They've had bipartisan support. Those are some of the things that we should look at. And we should also hold not only Democrats, but Republicans to the fire to ensure that they have that same process that they did when they were being nominated for other positions.
Imani, let's talk a little bit about people who've already gone through the process and been confirmed for other judgeships. You were already pointing out that you were a little skittish about Graham's endorsement, cheerleading almost for Childs. But Imani, what do you think about Judge Jackson? She's gotten some Republican support. She was confirmed to the appeals court with 3 GOP votes. However, she was recently part of the unanimous panel that upheld a congressional subpoena for White House records related to January 6 riots. What do you think the likelihood is that, you know, the Lindsey Grahams, the Susan Collins, the Lisa Murkowski's would turn their backs now on someone that they didn't have a problem with before when they were being confirmed for other roles?
I mean, just, as you said, her role in the January 6th investigations could very well play a part, because we've seen Republicans being completely unwilling to act in good faith when it comes to calling January 6th an insurrection, or even calling January 6th something that we should be concerned about as a nation. So I think there may be a difference in the way that Republicans regard Jackson with respect to the 1-6 insurrection, as opposed to how they regarded her when she was confirmed for the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. But I do think that the fact that she has been through this process means something. I think it's going to be difficult for those people to now turn around and find some sort of problem with her record. And it does sort of raise questions about why they would have that problem with her record with respect to the Supreme Court, but not with respect to the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. So, as I said, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I can't fathom that Brown Jackson is going to have a really difficult time getting confirmed. But at the same time, my concern is how the manner in which that confirmation is going to play out. Right? I mean, during her confirmation hearing for the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, for example, John Cornyn asked her something to the effect of, "Have you ever based one of your rulings on racial bias?" And these are the sorts of questions that are never asked of white men, right? Like the fact that Brett Kavanaugh was able to walk into his confirmation hearing and essentially have a temper tantrum talking about the Clintons and how it was a conspiracy among Democrats. A Black woman could never, right? None of these potential nominees are going to be able to walk into that hearing room and act like anything other than perfect behavior. And so that in and of itself says something about where we are as a country.
Dr. Ray, let's talk a little bit about what Imani was just discussing there, which is the differential in the way that white male nominees of all sorts are treated, and people of color. A new report from a watchdog group says that Biden's nominees of color have faced tougher confirmations than white nominees for positions at various departments. White and male nominees, quote, generally receive fastest tracks through the congressional process, it reads. We already know that the confirmation for Thurgood Marshall was longer and had more questions than anyone else's up to that point. We know that Clarence Thomas's confirmation was complicated for all completely different reason. Do you think the process itself will kind of meet this kind of historical marker of being more complicated for these Black women than it is for other people?
I think so. I mean, and again, as we just heard, there is a track record here with Brown. So we'll have a comparison. A lot of what we might see is political theater, but we also know we simply have to look recently to Andre Mathis, who was hailing from my great state of Tennessee, who was nominated for a judgeship. I went to undergrad with Andre Mathis, and he essentially was in a position where people were trying to make him apologize for some sort of speeding ticket, just going a few miles over the speed limit, and they were trying to talk about his record when he doesn't have one. Those are the types of things that oftentimes happen to Black candidates. And we know when we're talking about Black women, again, we're talking about that intersectional effect. So it's the length of time, it's the type of questions they're going to get. And if anyone needs to be asked about racial bias and whether or not they take that into account, it is all of the white men who sit behind judgeships. And we know the way that bias comes in. What we have up in Minneapolis, where individuals are actually giving out no-knock warrants for a case then previously that they resided over as it relates to police brutality. And of course, I'm talking about the person who resided over the murder of George Floyd and then handed out the no-knock warrant for
Right.
Amir Locke to be killed. So it's a lot going on here, and we need to pay attention to it.
Imani Gandy and Dr. Rashawn Ray, thank you both for joining me tonight. I really appreciate your time.